if residents strike, would that affect patient care?
Absolutely.
Would it really though? Because
Absolutely. Think about it. You ever go graduation for residency and you leave your attending alone for 4 hours? 4 hours. And they're like, oh my God, this was so horrible. These residents need to get back here. You're like, dude, you had 2 patients.
2 HMPs.
It's okay. Which they didn't even do. Like, yes, patient care would take a huge hit.
What's good, everyone? This is Docs Outside the Box, episode 345. I am your host, Dr. Nee. I'm joined by my co-host,
Dr. Renee.
Hey guys, this is a fusion of money, medicine, and pop culture. And let's jump right into this. How you doing?
I'm tired.
You're tired? Okay.
Yeah, I'm
You just had the
tired.
kids. I was working. So how
What do
you
you mean
tired?
just had the kids?
You just had the kids. You're supposed to take care of your kids.
Okay, I know
Ain't no
I'm
extra
supposed
credit.
to, but that
Ain't no
doesn't
extra
mean I'm
credit
not
here.
supposed to be tired.
Okay.
And I had them 24 hours. You had 12-hour shifts.
I had to do central lines, operations, all of these different things. Come on now.
Oh.
Hold on, though. But before we go down the rabbit hole, I just got to say real quick, I was covering one of the hospitals, and I just did a weekend, so I just worked from Friday till basically Monday, and I'll tell you right now, I had to take catapress. I had to do some meditation. So this episode is about residents unionizing, attendings unionizing, and basically, just using collective bargaining to advocate for themselves better, right? As a group, right? And against is usually, a big, large hospital system, maybe, a medical school, maybe an institution, whatever it is. The man, right?
Right.
I'm gonna go out and say that, just as big as we think these programs are, and they cause an issue for residents and they cause an issue for attendings and maybe even some medical students, I think we are, to some extent, our own worst enemy.
You mean doctors?
Yeah, I think doctors and our interactions with each other, I think that there are times where we go at it with each other and it makes no sense in the cutting down at each other, the competition, the lack of being professional with each other. That's a major problem. I had to deal with that this weekend. And you know me already. Like I keep everything professional, but also at the same time I have a level of I don't give a what. And there's a point where if you go past the line with me, I'm just going to stop that conversation and just say, look, like, I'm not going to curse at you. I'm not going to do any of this stuff, but I'm just going to be like, this conversation is over.
Right.
If there's another way in which you want to communicate with me, we can
Then
go ahead.
come back.
We can come back. If you want to go back and go meditate and come back and apologize and talk, we can do that. But we are no longer moving in this direction where you think that you're going to either talk over me, curse at me, or berate me at this point. 10 years in? What? So that happened. I had to stop the person. I was like, look, this conversation is over. And I just think about it. It's like, man, like, I know a lot of it is not personal.
Right.
I know a majority of it is work avoidance or, they're so busy that, maybe the stress of what they're doing, whether I'm assuming the majority of it is in the hospital, some of it may be from home, what have you, spills over, and then you become that target. And it's like, I'm not going to be your target.
Yeah.
So
I ain't going to be that dog you kick when you get home.
Right. So whatever it is, I get it, but just, comport yourself in a way that exudes professionalism. So I think, or being professional. And I think that, a lot of people, residents who are listening to this show or people who don't know, like, just because you get great grades and just because you finish at the top of your class or just because, people deem you to whatever it may be.
Whatever specialty, it was just so hard to get in. It's just the most competitive.
That makes you like the best or makes you someone who you would think, oh, man, I want to be like that person. Does not mean that you are, the epitome of someone who is professional or exudes professionalism or is basically someone who is nice or someone that you want to talk to.
Who is owed more respect than anyone else.
Right. That's the key right there. And oftentimes a lot of people who are like that, I shouldn't say a lot, but I think that I've seen a fair share of people who are very high achievers who feel like they should be held in reverence. And I'm like, no.
You're a person just like me. I mean, I think the thing about work avoidance is really true. I agree with you that oftentimes it's not personal, right? That people just kind of, have this work avoidance for the sake of energy conservation.
Yeah. So describe what that work avoidance is, because that's a key thing that you figured out like several months ago and you told me about it, I was like, oh, I never even thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I would think that, okay, this is personal. This person has an issue with me. Once you described it that way, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so work avoidance for the sake of energy conservation basically means that...
Work avoidance for the sake of energy
conservation, yeah.
Work avoidance for the...
Oh, are you trying to create an acronym? Alfred, create the acronym here for us, please.
Work avoidance for the sake of energy conservation.
So the...
WAF-CAF.
Waftsoik.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
So basically what that means is that I'm going to avoid doing this work that, you know, I want to make optional because I want to conserve my energy potentially for the thing that I don't know is going to be coming in, right? So for example, like if I'm an OB and I know I'm on a labor floor that is extremely busy, women are coming in, I have to triage them, they're coming in, I have to do C-sections, I gotta labor them, all kinds of things. But then let's say somebody calls me for, you know, a GYN consult in the ED. And it's something that I technically should be the one to go down to do. But then I tell the ER doc something like, well, can't you do that?
Right.
Right? I want to avoid that work because I need to conserve my energy for the things that either are already on labor and delivery or the things that might come to labor and delivery. So we see that a lot. A lot of doctors, I think that's the way they manifest their burnout, for example. And I think that really does impact the way that we interact with each other.
And I got to say that I think that it's a symptom of, you know, first of all, the workforce is very shrunken, right? Like if it's just you, one person who has to take care of all of those different things that you've mentioned, it's an issue. Here's another example in the surgery world. Like if I'm operating on a patient in the operating room and maybe I get a call from the ICU that, hey, we can't get, you know, peripheral IV. Can you do a central line? You know, I'm yelling at them like, what do you mean you can't call somebody else or blah, 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 blah. Like that may not be work avoidance, but that's the stress of, look, like I can only handle so many different things, right? And for me, I'm the type of person, well, what I do is I handle general surgery, I handle ICU, and I handle trauma. And those things all happen at the same time. So a lot of times, you know, that stress of one thing versus the other versus may manifest with, you know, you being like, I don't do that. I don't yell. Everybody knows I don't yell in the hospital. I don't talk down to people. I can be short sometimes. Nobody's perfect. You can be short, particularly when you have a lot of things going on. But I hear what you're saying.
It's like the dump, right? That's essentially what we call dumping. Like, oh, they dumped this patient. That's essentially the dump.
Yeah. So I think that what I said earlier, that interactions that I sometimes see, I think is a result of that, people wanting to, you know, have a manifestation of work avoidance or just being stressed out and so forth. And you know, so for me, I just wanted to say like, that I'm glad the weekend is over. You
took that cat of press.
Yeah, I took that cat of press.
Good to go.
So, you know, this episode is about, you know, we're going to talk about unions. Particularly resident unions, because there was a recent Wall Street Journal article that came out that just kind of highlighted the fact that the Stanford residents decided to unionize. It's not actually new news. This is something that came out in February. They actually voted to do this in February, March of 2022. It just so happened this is when the article came out. But before we jump into that really quick, I just want to say, so, you know, we joke around with Jamar, who's one of our great listeners, dedicated listeners, but he did respond to us. Because remember, I wrote to him and I said, yo, how old are you?
Right.
Like, what are you doing? And so forth. He wrote a big response. So we're going to save that for another episode. But I just want to say, for those who are listening and want to get a follow-up on it, Jamar said that he is 33 and actually is just a pre-med. So that would make him a
non-traditional pre-med.
Okay. He graduated in 2013 with a master's in computer information systems and been working full-time in information technology since then, as well as taking prereqs for medical school starting in 2017. So the fact that he's in IT makes sense as to why he was answering all of our questions about the Mac.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, because he knows that stuff.
He knows that stuff.
He knows the stuff.
Yeah.
And he was taking prereqs for med school starting in 2017 and pursuing other endeavors. I'd like to be a surgeon, not entirely sure which yet. So,
okay.
That was dope. So
right,
listen,
cool.
Jamar, we appreciate you. We're going to try to get you on the show so we can talk about, some of the other questions that you may have.
Yeah.
And listen, shout out to everybody else who's listening to the show but is looking for a way to communicate with us. The best way, I think, the quickest way to communicate with us is text us at 1-833-230-2860. Alfred, please put that on the bottom. 1-833-230-2860. Literally, we get a text that shows up in our phone, and we will respond to you and communicate with you. And it's a great way for you to let us know how you feel about an episode. If you agree with what we have to say, I think a lot of people are I think there's going to be some polarizing feelings after this topic that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Another way you can contact us is go to drneatdarko.com and go to the contact page, and it will give you an opportunity to let us know if you have a question, if you want to come on with us and ask your question on the show.
Come on with me, you mean.
Come on with us and ask your question on the show. You can be anonymous even if you come onto the show. We can do voice only, or we can put your cute little face on the computer screen.
I think I have something that I want people to weigh in on is, should we make Renee a permanent co-host of the show? That's what I think we should do.
But we already determined that. Jamar already put in his vote.
Jamar is 33 and he's a pre-med. What he know?
He already put in his vote. He the only listener you got.
So all y'all other listeners who are just like, damn, make sure you make your voice known, because right now we got crickets a little bit on Textful. And
now Jamar gonna vote again, and he's definitely voting for me.
Stuff the ballots. Hey, listen, let's jump into this resident topic. But before we jump into this, let's take a break. We will be right back, all right?
And now a message from Optimus Prime.
Greetings. Subscribe to Docs Outside the Box. Smash that like button and hit that notification bell. Do it now. Optimus Prime out.
That was a message from Optimus Prime.
All right, so let's talk about this unionization thing.
Yeah.
Like, I have no clue about unionizing because I think more so you're a resident.
I was a delegate
You're
when
resident.
I was a resident, yes.
So Stanford back in 2022, February 2022 or March of 22, they voted, I think 80% or 80-something percent decided that they wanted to unionize.
Only 80%.
Yeah, only 80%. But that's a lot, though. Right?
I mean, that is a lot, but I would have thought it would have been in the 90s.
Listen, with doctors, come on.
I know, but they're residents.
It's
still.
like doctors are like Democrats. It's like,
you
they
never know what you're gonna get.
They all over the place. You don't know what you really gonna get. You know what I'm saying? Whereas Republicans are like, no matter what, we in lockstep.
This is the party line.
We are in lockstep.
I don't care if it destroys us.
So the fact that you're able to get 80%, I'm like, take it and run. So they voted, and they decided to unionize. And listen, that's where we're at. They decided to join I think they're part of CIR. So
CIR, SCIU.
Yeah, so CIR is the Committee of Interns and Residents. That's the largest group of unionized residents in the country.
That's for whom I was a delegate.
And then CIR is also a part of a larger group, a larger umbrella called SEIU, which is the Service Employees International Union. This started in 1997. Yeah. So CIR, if you go to their website, they're really about raising standards as well as resident well-being. There's a bunch of residents out there or residencies out there that are unionized, but it's obviously the minority. But this is really interesting. I think you can actually go to the Wall Street Journal article and find it. This will be in the show notes, and you can go check this out. We're not here to really talk about the specifics, but more or less kind of do a 30,000-foot view about what we think about this. So tell us your experience with CIR at your residency.
Yeah. So.
And this is over like 30 years ago.
Get out of here, Nee. Whatever.
It's your old ass.
Anyway, but you married me though.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Just waiting for that Medicare to kick in. That Social Security to kick in.
Okay, and I'm not going to share any of it with you. So so I was a delegate for CIR at when it was UMD&J Robert Wood Johnson hospitals are in my residency. I'm not, so my involvement wasn't very, very active, right? So I did participate in, kind of their voting proceedings and things like that during the time when they had their annual conference. But other than that, there wasn't necessarily, when I had boots on the ground, there wasn't really much to do. I will say that the only thing that I probably did do is that I helped one of our residents actually navigate her not getting fired. Because one of the residents who was actually in my class, she had actually transferred into my class. And by the second year of her transferring, they actually wanted to fire her. And I just kind of helped her to navigate through that. But that was really the extent of my involvement. But I will say that my memory of going to the annual conference, it was kind of more of the same thing, just really looking at the resident experience in a way where it's like, listen, we're working and we are learners, but we deserve some dignity as well, right? You can't work us like oxen, right? We have to have some time off. We have to have, good working conditions, and people have to be respectful. And that's not something that you always get in residency. It's not something that I always saw, even in my own residency. So,
and this is a relatively new thing in healthcare because, just being recognized as employees versus students was a big holdup in terms of being able to unionize. And now that residents, for the most part, they're in the match process. The match process kind of takes away the ability to negotiate wages.
Right.
It takes away it takes away a lot of ability to do anything.
Yeah.
The other thing too that is I didn't even notice is that when you are in a match, or just the NRMP in general, that is actually, let me make sure I get this correct. That is, the match has an antitrust exemption given by Congress in 2002. So they can participate in a whole bunch of, the current way in which they're practicing is protected under law, even though most would say that they're acting as a trust.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But, being in the match does actually take away a lot of the freedoms that you would have, right? Because, you might list a program, but that might have been like the 7th program, meaning that's really not where you want it to be. So people who say, well, but you signed up for it, it's like, but did I sign up for that? Like, that was literally my last resort. That was my last resort. I didn't want to go to this program necessarily.
Currently, that's the only way in which you can legitimately get into a training program in the United States is to participate in the match.
Exactly.
Hence why Congress decided to like, this is not just in medicine, guys. This is in sports, right? Major League Baseball has a huge antitrust protection, and like a lot of these type of big business entities, NFL and so forth, they're all protected so that they can maintain a certain level of, what's the word? Not standard, but a certain level of
control.
Well, definitely control. But they're protected, so they're able to do this, right? So if you are an NFL player, or if you're in college, the only way you can play in the NFL is to get drafted. into the NFL, and you don't have control over where you go. And then also at the same point, up until several years ago, you didn't have the ability to negotiate what your what your contract, what your salary was going to be, and things like that. And to the extent you really don't still, but you can negotiate a little bit more because they have a little bit of a stronger union. Yeah. Not as good as the baseball league, but it
just goes to show you though that, what unionizing can do, right? Because like you said, the sports leagues are really great examples of that, right? The fact that people can negotiate somewhat. Even if it's not necessarily, the negotiations of our dreams, but for the most part, at the very least, they're able to have some say as to what the conditions of their workplace is going to look like, what the pay is going to be.
Yeah, and that's a big deal because I think I got to find that Twitter. There was a guy on Twitter who was able to show like the stagnation of resident wages over years to even decades, and the ability to compare what the wages are at residencies that don't have unions versus residencies that have unions, and just show like there's an actual like statistical difference between the two. But it's really important because collective bargaining is something that we as physicians, we as medical students, we balk at it, and it's just something that we're just not used to doing, right? Because as a resident, or excuse me, as a pre-med student, you're studying by yourself. You're trying to take a test. You're competing against someone else. When you get into medical school, they do the usual, you look to your left, look to your right. Like this person is not going to be there by the time you graduate. So there's this sense of competing against each other that's encouraged. When you get to residency, it's not as bad as it was now, but you can imagine when they had like the pyramidal systems where, everybody was trying to go at each other's throats so that they can graduate. It was extremely competitive. And then afterwards, asking them to come together and provide a collective voice
Work
for something.
Together.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. Right? Yeah. But as we're starting to see now, like, but when we're talking in the late 90s, we're talking about like less than like 2%, maybe even 4 or 5% of physicians were unionized. Now we're talking realistically like 9%, 10%. But also at the same time, that increase in unionization is small, but actually the amount of doctors back then in the 90s to now who are hospital employed has exploded. We're talking about a little bit more than half of doctors right now are employed by hospital systems. And that changes the game, right? Like the reason why residents are able to unionize is because they're employees. Right? The fact that you are an employee gives you a certain level of protection under United States law to collectively bargain. And then the next step obviously will be able to form a union, right? But when you are a bunch of private practice doctors,
then you don't get that.
You may not get that. If you are a bunch of locums doctors, you may not get that. Now, there are workarounds and there are ways to get around it, but basically the whole notion is that if you are an independent doctor, if you are an independent practitioner, the thought process is if you are working with other doctors who are not employed and you decide to form almost like a union or act like a union, it's actually not unionizing, right? Because you're not being forced to accept certain things as an employee. You're actually possibly colluding. Right?
Okay,
so that's
collusion.
So that's the reason why there's antitrust laws that are very sharply against that. So now that the stage has continued to change, even the AMA is pro collective bargaining, not really sure where they stand on unionization. They're kind of pro it, kind of not. I don't know. The thing that I think for residents listening, I'm sure they're just like, well, what's the pros and what's the cons? In my opinion, I can't see a con to joining a union.
Me either.
At your residency.
Me either, especially as an employee, right? Because the reality is, if you're employed, your employer basically, so like you said, you have a lot of rights, but your employer, it doesn't necessarily mean that your employer won't walk all over those rights, won't violate your rights, right? And so if you have a union behind you to be able to say, hey, my rights have just been violated, then you actually won't feel alone when you're fighting that fight. But if you don't unionize and your employer violates your rights, then you're walking in by yourself. There's no delegate, there's no witness to what to what's going on. They don't have, you don't have a contract that protects you such that you have a specific process that has to be done before you either get fired or get some sort of penalty. Your pay might be affected.
Well, here's one thing that I remember, now that I'm, a parent now, I'm obviously not a mom and anything like that, but I just remember in residency.
You are a dad.
I don't remember though, like there was any provisions for the women who were residents for like just even like lactation rooms or lactation support or like even an ability to have time to like pump or anything like that.
Well, but you're also talking at a time when that legislation actually finally went through. There was national legislation regarding that, regarding lactation, the ability to breast pump in a place that was very sanitary.
Right.
That didn't come about until 2009, 2010, like after Obamacare had passed, because that was actually a part of that
And
legislation.
for the record, I was still in residency. Don't try to date me, all right? Because you finished, what, 2002 or something like that?
No, I finished 2010. Stop playing.
All right. So
anyway,
don't try to date me.
so that actually came through 2009, 2010. But I do remember I had a resident, a senior resident who had given birth and she needed to pump, and she would literally have to pump in the resident room. So like anybody could be we used to walk in on her pumping all the time. Yeah. I'm like, thank goodness we're an OBGYN residency, so nobody really cared or whatever. But, you know, people sometimes feel uncomfortable about those things. And so, you know, now there are those protections under law, but there wasn't a long time ago. And so the question becomes, if your employer violates that right for you to be able to have a sanitary place, they just go to the bathroom and pump. I'm not pumping in nobody's bathroom. Like,
right. So as an individual, are you going to speak up?
Exactly.
But if you're in a union, you go to your delegate,
right,
or you go. More than likely, that issue already is already on their radar. But collectively,
right,
you know, if you got a whole bunch of people, like as Martin says, can you take all of us? Right?
Excuse me. Can you tell us? Where we can get some toothpaste from?
We want, lactation rooms. We want some toothpaste.
Can you tell us where we can find some toothpaste?
Right? Not just one of us.
Toothpaste.
Right? And I think that's a really good point. Like, here's one thing, though, that I think is the biggest fear. Mm-hmm. Even the AMA has said it. I think that's the biggest thing from all the societies out there is the fear of strike. Right?
Okay.
And let's get into that, because actually the last strike involving CIR was in 1981, and it was in New York City.
Was that after, was that right before the whole resident work hours changed?
No, the resident work hours was like in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah, or mid 2000s.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay.
So, because I think here's a concept like, well, if things get really bad, would residents strike? Mm-hmm. If residents strike, would that affect patient care?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Would it really, though? Because
think about it. Hold on, think about it. You ever go to graduation? You ever go graduation for residency and you leave your attending alone for 4 hours? 4 hours. You leave them alone. And they're like, oh my God, this was so horrible. These residents need to get back here. You're like, dude, you had 2 patients in 4 hours.
2 HMPs.
It's okay. 2 HMPs, which they didn't even do. They didn't even do the HMP. Right. Okay.
Yeah, we saved the HMP for you when you get back from your
exactly.
from your
come
training.
on. Are you serious? Like, yes, patient care would take a huge hit.
Well, that's something that is a debated thing, because it's like, well, residents ultimately have to get everything signed off by attendings. Right?
Yeah, but who's still doing the work?
Well, I mean, obviously, so the work is being done by residents.
Right.
But there's this fallback where you have attendings there who can provide coverage and so forth.
Right.
I don't know if that really exists in other realms, in other professions and so forth. So that's something to consider. Right. The other thing that I think is very interesting is the public's perception of what actually happens. So I think most people actually think that attendings take care of patients directly. Right. So I think if they heard that residents were striking, I don't know if it would really hit them as much as if they found out that they're, world-renowned, heavily researched, the same doctor that's on the, that's on the billboard. If that doctor is striking versus if a bunch of residents who are training, who they rarely see or they may see,
or don't recognize as like actual attending physicians.
What would be the perception from those? That's something that I'm really interested in. Yeah. Because I think the only thing that I can do is, in these type of situations, is translate it to what we see in other sports. Mm-hmm. Or it's translated to what we see in sports or in other industries. Mm-hmm. And what we definitely know in terms of labor laws is the public will always side on owners, billionaires versus millionaires versus, six figures and 5-figure people. I don't understand that mindset. But if you look at it at sports, right? Like if you have players who strike versus the owners, you have billionaires who can write multiple, exponentials of a check. The public will be on their side as opposed to, because, the public will be like, well, look, man, you should be happy with what you got.
Right.
You're basically getting paid millions of dollars to play a game. I wish I was in your shoes and so forth.
And then there'll be the same people who complain about, oh, the minimum wage is too low. And I'm like, so it doesn't work for you in your job when you know that you need more money.
I think the majority of people don't want, I think they are swayed by the whole concept of minimum wage, I think.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Yeah. My point is that, it's funny because the dichotomy of, well, it doesn't work for me. Like, I'm upset with my own situation and therefore, I would like for things to change. I think the difference is that most people can't do anything about it, right? Like the person who wants the minimum wage to go up but can't literally strike so that the minimum wage does go up is upset because the player can actually strike even though the player is making millions of dollars.
I would say that the person who wants minimum wage to go up usually is not the person who's complaining that they want baseball players or players in general to not strike. That's
really?
What I would say.
So?
No, that's what I would say. The person who's getting minimum wage and wants minimum wage to go up, I would say for the most part is not the same person who wants players to just shut up and just play. That's what I would say. But I'm very interested in what people would, because I think that's a big fear. I think that's a fear not just of professional societies. I think it's obviously a big fear of institutions. I think to some extent, I think attendings would be shook also.
Oh, of course attendings would be shook. I mean, first of all, the residents outnumber the attendings, by multiples, right? Yeah. So that in and of itself, the amount of work that residents do, even if you took every single attending and you put them on board, like they would not be able to do all of the work that a resident load would be able to do, at least not in the same time that residents would be able to do it, right? The fact that attendings write, they sign off on resident work. Like, how many times have you been in a clinic?
I have seen and examined this patient with the trainee.
Right? You've been in clinic, you saw like 10 patients in the last hour, right? And the attending is like, all right, you just tell the attending, I saw this patient, this, da, da, da. They're like, okay, long as it sounds like you ain't killed nobody, we good to go. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's a lot of work, right? We used to have like 40 patients within 4 hours at our clinic. 40 patients. You think even two attendings can handle that? I don't even think they could afford to send two attendings to that clinic. Yeah, right. And you can't even afford it.
And just in general, that's a lot of patients. And
right.
I think that's where unions, particularly for residencies, they kick in. They're just like, look, like some of the facilities that you give us, they're not up to par. The fact that you give us so many patients is not up to par. The fact that we don't have A, the fact that we don't have B is up to par. And we as a group, in essence, demand this. And I think from what I've seen so far, a lot of it has always been like, let's work together. It's professional. Let's work together. I think the last thing that we want to get to is a strike. So I was just, I got this surgeon news that comes in the mail, and it was talking about how this huge group in, I think it's Santa Clara of California, they were just about to go on strike.
Oh, God.
Just about to go on strike. And it was a multidisciplinary group of physicians. And it took 2 years of labor negotiations that just kind of stalled. And once they said, look, we're going on strike, that's when things started to speed up and so forth. But yeah, I think
the goal is never to strike.
Right.
I think that would hurt a lot of people. And I think that's not the point of a union. I think you have a union so that you can actually negotiate those things that would avoid you going,
and we're right off a strike though. We are in the New Jersey area. In New York City, the nurses just striked in in Montefiore and some of these other hospitals and stuff. So
the goal is never to strike.
One of the first jobs that we took together, the nurses striked.
Yes.
That was scary.
Yeah.
That was scary because we ended up getting a whole bunch of travel nurses, which are fine, but
the learning curve.
The EMR.
Right.
They're not understanding how we do things normally.
Right.
That was an issue.
Yeah.
And they were nice and great, but that was an issue.
Absolutely. And especially because you're not just getting one travel nurse. everybody is a travel nurse. So there isn't even necessarily a group of people who are like, oh, this is how this works. There's no orientation, from the people who actually are there, or there are very few people who are there. So it's like, it's not just one travel nurse, it's all travel nurses together. And it's like, wait, what? Everybody's new? So yeah. So
my last question that I think about too is there a point to all of this, right? The whole point of residency is to train you to become an independent physician, to train you to do what you're expected to do on your own as an attending,
right?
To put you in that world, right? Like the world, like if everybody's unionized and then you go out into a world where the minority are unionized, what is the point? It's the same thing with like resident hours, right? I think it's great that we have resident duty hours for residency, but what is the point of this when they're just going to release you out into a world where nobody's checking for that? There are no duty restrictions when you become an attending. So in essence, are we actually not preparing them well for life as an attending? Like nobody wants an attending to do all these crazy hours, 80 hours a week, or sometimes even more depending on where you're at. But there is no checks and balances there, right? I can understand if there was like a guideline out there or there was a governing body that made sure that attendings were able to check in and check out like pilots do. There is nothing like that. So
I can operate on you if I'm working 52 hours straight.
I've seen that. I haven't done that. I haven't done that, but I've seen that. I've seen that.
Of course.
So it's just like, well, okay, so unionizing is great. You're going to have great accommodations, or you're going to have respectable accommodations, but only like 10% of physicians right now are unionized. Like, does this make any sense? What are your thoughts?
Well, so I will say this. I will say that residents fall into a specialized group in that they're not just employees, they are learners.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the point. The point is for them to be in an environment where they actually can learn their craft and be able to do it well, right? To be very well trained, right? Because if they don't have good working conditions, it's not just working conditions. That's actually their learning environment. Their working conditions is their actual learning environment. So are you preparing residents to go out into the working world more unprepared if you disrupt their learning environment with things that really should not enter the learning environment? So that, it's to protect that learning environment and allow those residents to, get the skill, get the knowledge level that they need in order to go out into the free world. Now, they will be released into the wild and they won't necessarily have the protection of a union. That is a pure working environment. That is a pure working environment. That's not to say that working environments don't deserve protection as well. They certainly do. But the difference in medicine is that you can go out and you can hang a shingle for yourself. You actually have an option of being an employee or not being an employee. And that's a real option. This is not NRMP. This is not a match system where if you don't train, then you cannot absolutely work.
She's cooking.
I'm not cooking. So this is not that. This is you actually making the decision to go out and work under a certain condition. At that point, that's when you say, that's when you could theoretically say, well, this is what you signed up for, right? That's the point at which you would say that. In residency, that's not what you signed up for. You signed up for a good learning environment to be able to learn your craft. So, I think.
What would the public say about doctors, like attendings?
Yeah. So
I think the perception would be very. I think it would be very similar to what I think the public would turn against doctors. If they strike.
I do think the public.
Nasty.
Yes, I think the
even
public
more
would,
so than finding out that your nursing group striked. It'd be a major issue. I think that there would be some major backlogs in a lot of things that people have grown accustomed to. And I think they would look at their doc with,
Like, what do you mean you went on strike? What about me? You didn't take care of me. You didn't. Plus, there's so many different implications to that, right? The liability issue. Are you abandoning your patient? Are you neglecting your patient? So these are the other things that you have to think about, right? Here's the issue, though.
And just for the record, though, before you get into your point, there is plenty of ways to withhold certain things without actually striking. So there are plenty of ways that doctors can make it difficult for an institution that they're negotiating with without actually affecting patient care without affecting emergency patient care also. So I just want people to know there's no like, zero-sum game, or if we're not getting what we're getting, then we're going on strike and that's it. There's plenty of options before you get to that point.
Yeah. I was going to say that the thing, though, is I don't know if, you actually sent me the Twitter post by Brian Carmody.
Yes. Okay.
Who is at, who's at EVMS. And it was just really interesting, some of the comments that he highlighted from that Wall Street Journal article. And, he he basically said, that his quote unquote favorite comment was there was no issue with work-life balance until women became MDs.
Yeah.
And he says,
Renée,
don't worry, Stockholm Syndrome, the Bootstraps Brigade, and socialized medicine fear-mongering are there too, right? Being sarcastic, about some of the comments. But I was going to say that it will be a hard sell for attendings to unionize on a widespread level. It will be a hard sell because of things like this, right? Because of the things that he highlighted as comments.
Back in my day, we worked
back in my day
300 hours a week and stuff.
Exactly. There was no work-life balance. I'm like, you're absolutely right. Whoever wrote that comment, there was no work-life balance until women became MDs. Men literally don't look for work-life balance is essentially what he's saying,
the reason why
right?
we are in this situation is because of them damn doctors who were saying all of those different things back in my day and all that stuff. Back in the day, ain't nobody tell you to give up the reins of the hospital to some MBA.
Exactly.
Why did you do that?
Exactly.
And because of your actions, we are in this situation.
Yep. You went and sold medicine for a pretty penny, and now we're all in this situation. And so the reality is, like, look, when you sell your soul, you have to understand that there are what do they call it, unintended consequences to your actions. And so all of these doctors in the 80s and 90s who went and sold their souls in the 90s,
still some in the 70s,
right? Who went, that's kind of when it started. Yeah. But when they went and sold their souls to medicine, or excuse me, to the business people, this is what they got. And these are the same doctors who will complain, right? These are the same doctors who will complain, but then they'll complain about the other side too. They'll complain about, the bureaucracy in medicine and that, they're not getting paid as much money and they're not doing this, they're not getting that. But then they'll also complain if somebody else complains about the opposite thing. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous.
Some of them will complain about diversity. Some of them will complain that there's more women in there.
Exactly.
That's the issue. Some of them will complain that, hey, this is a meritocracy, quote unquote, and all that BS that we'll talk about in another episode coming up. So guys, stay tuned for that.
Yeah. But it's just really interesting.
Go through because his thread is really good. So we're going to put that link in the thread. Yeah. Link in the
show notes.
In the show notes.
Yeah.
There was something else he did. Scroll up. What else he said? See, we need like a...
You want a producer?
We need not like a producer, but we need like a show person who can scroll up and show us what's going on.
Yeah, you want.
If anybody's interested, text us at 833-230-2860.
Jamar, are you looking to scroll up for us?
We'll call it a screen person.
A screen person?
Yeah, it'll be a man or a woman. You can be up there just scrolling through the screen and letting us know what we need to know.
It'll be anybody.
Well, anyway, listen, I think so the point of this is not literally to end this discussion, but literally to kind of just give you guys a primer on how unions work and how specifically they work for residents. In my opinion, I do not think that there are... I don't know what the cons are. Yes, if you have an issue in year one and if your residency forms a union that year or in year two, like the likelihood of you seeing something happen during your residency lifetime is unlikely. It's going to be very slow to change. That's one of the cons that people say. Like, a lot of these changes and negotiations take forever. Yeah. And why should I be a part of it? Well, that's the point. Like, because
I'm not going to benefit from it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so the point of it is that you have to look behind yourself, right? You have to look to the people who are coming behind you and see if you can create a better situation for them also, even though you may not necessarily benefit from that.
Right.
But other than that, I think that there's just so many wins, particularly in a situation like you said, where it's a combination of learning as well as working and you don't necessarily sign up for this situation, right? You explained it perfectly, which is, you're going into the match system. It's a trust, basically. They're protected. It's a monopoly. They're protected. And, you really don't have a say as to where you're going to go. And you don't have a say as to what kind of wage, what kind of benefits you're going to get.
Right.
So you guys might as well have an opportunity to unionize since it's already protected by the law and go from there. So listen, everyone, we covered a lot, but I'm very interested. We're very interested in what you got to say about this. Text us at 833-230-2860. We will put the links in the show notes, not only to this tweet.
I got one more thing.
Make it quick.
One more
Make it
thing.
quick.
Yes, I'm making it quick. And I think it's in here in this tweet.
Make it quick.
Anywho, so there's one of the comments that Dr. Carmody puts in this tweet, and it says something about how the long hours and all the these work conditions basically were necessary in order for him to be able to take his boards and pass his boards. And I'm like, I wonder how he would feel about the AI passing boards.
Speak on it. Episode 344, y'all. Episode 344. As you already know, I think that was proof right there that shows this system. If a computer system can get this without any context of clinical skills and
just trends, looking at trends of questions.
That should already say enough. Yeah. Not to say that we shouldn't have any type of licensing examination.
Right.
I just feel like the current way in which we have the licensing examination
is very
doesn't work,
interesting.
which is the same thing that we said 10, 15 years ago. Like, why we got this, the PE examination, the physical examination to step 2, which, for all of these years, everybody swore by it. And now it's what? It's gone. Right? It's gone.
Right.
So,
it's gone.
Just because something exists doesn't mean that it has to exist. So,
right.
I'll just...
Or it doesn't have to exist in the way that it currently exists.
And then, anyway, I was going to talk about the lunches that they had at the physical exam. Remember the lunch that they gave us?
I don't even remember.
Like these old, janky subs and stuff. It was like, how much was that test?
Better give me some gourmet.
Hey. Anyway. Well, listen, guys, that concludes this episode of Docs Outside the Box. Hey, make sure you let us know what you think. You can always text us at the number. Once again, I'm going to say the number is 833-230-2860. And listen, we are super excited at this new format that we're trying out with Docs Outside the Box. We're going to try to have some more interviews with people or segments where we have people and we're recording and putting them into the show so you can see what our thoughts are. I actually heard from student Dr. Asias.
Oh, so the student that dropped out of medical school.
Oh, yeah, from episode 343. So we're going to try to get him into a future episode. And listen, guys, we do this for y'all. So let us know what you think. We're really interested. Yeah. And we'll go from there.
Yeah, we want to hear from you all. So come on to the show, or at least write us a question, and then we can see whether or not you can come on to the show.
Peace, y'all.
Peace.